On first down, they hand off to Marlon Mack. Huge hole, 50-yard line. He's at the 40, still going near sideline. He's at the 10. He's at the 5, and he will score. Touchdown, Marlon Mack. Touchdown, INDY. And again, it's picked off. It's Darius Leonard. Leonard with a second INT, and he's streaking down the near sideline. He's at the 40. He's at the 30. He's at the 20. He's going to go. A pick six for the Maniac. Kenny Moore gets to Deshaun Watson. That's a sack for Kenny Moore. Kenny has a pick and now a sack in the game.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
What's going on, Colts fans? Welcome back to another edition of the Bringing the Juice podcast. I am your host, as always, Cody Felger, your other host, Derek Larger, joining me. Derek, the NFL draft's coming closer and closer. Welcome back to our second look at the positions in the draft. And today, we're going to look at the wide receiver room. Yesterday, we looked at the quarterbacks and running backs, and today we're going to look at the wide receivers. And Derek, there's a lots of guys that could fit the mold here for the Colts. It's their biggest position of need, arguably on the team, no doubt the offense. So there's lots and lots of guys that we could look at. And we kind of wanted to do it not just based off of all of the prospects, but kind of looking at the prospects we think will be available when the Colts pick, presumably in the second round, and also later on in the draft. And so, Derek, I think you have the first prospect here, so take it away, my man.
Yep, I absolutely will. And I'll just say also for disclaimer, there's a lot more prospects. Obviously, we know that we've mentioned that this is the biggest wide receiver class that there has been in a while, and a lot more guys that we're not going to cover in this list. But we're just talking guys that, you know, have been spoken about quite a bit. And some other guys that are not on this list, we maybe have already talked about a lot. So we're just not wanting to repeat ourselves. So first guy that we're going to mention is Jalen Reagor from TCU, height of 5'11", 205 pounds, with about 31.4-inch arms, 9.5-inch hands, with a reported 40 time of a 4.45, which actually many people said that at his pro day actually ran a 4.3 or potentially lower. So take that at face value, whatever you want, but he certainly got a decent 40 time. In 2019, Reagor notched 43 catches for 611 yards and 5 touchdowns. Also provided a lot of big plays as a punt returner. That could mean some competition between Nyheim Hines and Reagor for punts this next season if Reagor is to come to the Colts. So obviously, Reagor's just a special talent when it comes to his speed. His get up off the line is incredible. Just burns corners, and he just gets open all the time. And obviously, the stats don't really blow you away when you look at it. But, I mean, you have to think also about who the quarterback is that's been throwing it to him. It's certainly not Phillip Rivers, and it's not really been a great combination for Reagor. A lot of people have actually mentioned how he actually has some of the more higher drop rating when you look at some of the top end wide receivers out there. Well, I'll also mention that on percentage of throws that were thrown to him, he's had some of the worst QB ratings when the ball's been thrown to him. So either the ball's on him or it's just the quarterback having difficulty getting it to him. So obviously, Reagor, you can throw it whichever way you want to when you're looking at the numbers, but when you look at the play, it's different. I mean, this guy's a home run hitter, just like Paris Campbell, and just like Frank Reich said about Paris Campbell, he's a threat to score every time he touches the ball. Just gets amazingly, he's just amazing in the open field. Kind of reminds you of the Deshaun Jackson or Marquise Brown, guys like that just once they get the ball in their hands, they're explosive. And even when they don't, just burning people when they get there. So Jalen Reagor, many say, is a late first round, early second round guy. I'm all aboard the Jalen Reagor hype for him coming to the Colts. Cody, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I like him a lot. He's a guy that, when a lot of people have been talking about and mocking some receivers of the Colts, lots of people think, and myself included, the Colts need to get some big body receivers. Jalen Reagor, he's not a small guy. I mean, he's 5'11", so he's got decent size. He's about Paris Campbell's height there. He's a guy, yeah, like you mentioned, he's very, I feel like he's similar to Campbell in a lot of ways because he's a burner. He's really, really fast. I would say he's better at running routes. I feel like he's better at, just has a better route tree at this point than Campbell coming out. He's a guy that, we've mentioned for years and years. It seems like the Colts don't have guys that can potentially, make plays after the catch. And he's a guy that has tremendous rack ability. He's the type of guy that'll make guys miss in the open field. When you get the ball into his hands, you mentioned it, Derek, he is a playmaker. He's a guy that's very smart as a football player. And with presumably the Colts offense going to be a vertical type of offense, this fits very well into what Frank Reich and this offense wants to do. I guess my question is, you kind of got a guy like that in Paris Campbell. Do you want to add another guy? I mean, great speed and all that stuff. And you need more explosion on your offense, but do you feel like you already have a guy in Paris Campbell that you have that speed and you want to get more of a possession type of receiver? But I mean, personally for me, I would not be opposed if the Colts got him. I think he's a really, really good player, adds another level to your offense in terms of playmaking ability. You throw in T.Y. Hilton, who we know he's been injured, but when he's healthy, he's one of the fastest and most explosive receivers in the league. Paris Campbell, one of the fastest receivers in the league, and then Nyheim Hines, one of the fastest running backs in the league. So just adding more and more speed. I'm certainly on board with this guy. He's not, when you think of fast receivers, sometimes I think, I know I can do this. I typically think of a kind of smaller type of receivers, but he's not like small. Like you mentioned, he's 200 pounds. He's not a small receiver by any means, but he's a guy that's tough. And I think he's just a guy that I would like to see on the Colts, but I think the question is, do the Colts feel like they need to get more of a big possession type of receiver? But yeah, overall, if you're making me choose, I like Reagor quite a bit. And then the next guy on our list here, we can look at a guy that I had in my first mock draft, the Colts picking, and that's T. Higgins. Speaking of big body receivers, he's 6'4", 216, 34.13 arms, 9.25, hands. Projected to be potentially a late first, early second rounder. Last year, he had 59 catches for 1,167 yards, 13 touchdowns. He's a type of receiver that I think Phillip Rivers would love in this offense. He's tall, he's long, he's a red zone weapon, which I know Phillip Rivers has had success with some of those guys, with the Chargers and Mike Williams, Vincent Jackson, some of those type of guys. He's a guy that, you can throw the ball at 50-50 type of ball like Phillip Rivers likes to do, and he can come down with it. He's just a very dangerous red zone threat. You kind of think, it's kind of a term, a volleyball type of receiver where he can go up and get the ball. I think that certainly if he's not taken in the first round, he certainly could be a pick there in the second round. The Colts have 2 second-round picks, 34 and 44. He could be a guy that could be there for the Colts, and he could be a pretty good complement to T.Y. Hilton and Paris Campbell. He definitely would be the biggest receiver on the Colts and just give this Colts offense something they haven't had in a long, long time, and that's a big, dominant possession red zone receiver. So I like him a lot. I think some people are lower on him, but I'm kind of just of the mindset of give Phillip Rivers some weapons, up some guys that you've seen that he likes, that kind of body type. But Derek, what do you think about him, about T. Higgins?
Yeah, just kind of stay away from the stats for a minute. It's hard to kind of look at a stat from a college that had 3 or 4 guys on that offense that could have gone pro this year. And when you have Trevor Lawrence throwing you the football, Trevor Lawrence is going to spread it out. Obviously, those numbers are a little different when it comes to, how he spreads the ball around. But like you said, you just got to take it at face value. When you're 6'4" and you're 215 pounds, you're that big. You're obviously going to be a red zone guy, and you're going to be a guy that's going to be able to make those catches over corners. Just here's the issue that everyone has is just, one, do you trust his durability. He's had some injury problems before, and that could be a concern. He's dealt with a lot of different hurts. I think in that Ohio State game, he actually went out of the game, if I'm not mistaken, at least 3 times in that game because he just kept re-aggravating injuries of some kind. I don't know how, but he would go in and come back out a few plays later, go back in and come back out a few plays later because he just couldn't stay on the field. But and then you have to look at that 40 time. Obviously, it's a 4.5, not too great, obviously, but I don't necessarily think Mike Williams' 40 time was necessarily that great either. And I think Mike Williams is actually like right around the same size. So, I mean, if you can just kind of get away from the 40 time and just take T. Higgins for what he is just a big body guy that can catch. I mean, obviously that's a good choice, and especially for a quarterback like Phillip Rivers. If they want to get him in the second round, I would love it if they could get him with the 44th. I don't necessarily want to get him with the 34th, but 44th, I'm all in on it. All right, so here's a guy who a lot of people said is going to be taken 34 by the Indianapolis Colts. I can't remember who it was that actually has, I think Vegas odds actually have this guy to be the favorite for the Colts at 34, and that's Denzel Mims from Baylor, 6'2", 205. I think he's actually 6'3", but we'll go with that. 33, almost 33 and a half inch arms, 9.25 inch hands, 40 time at around a 4.4. This guy is definitely a good sized wide receiver, a guy that, can go up and get it. He had 66 catches for over 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns in 2019. He had a pretty decent Senior Bowl. And obviously with that 40 time, it really turns a lot of heads. I mean, obviously there are teams that were grading him on day 3, but I mean, I don't understand how when you're looking at a guy like this. I mean, because he's been a solid wide receiver over the last 2 years. I mean, even as a junior, he had 55 catches for 800 yards and 8 scores. I mean, he was even better as a sophomore. He actually had 61 catches for 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. I mean, he's got good size. I mean, 6'2" is good size, 205 pounds, so he's not small. That arm length of almost 33 and a half inches, that's impressive. I mean, that's almost as long as T. Higgins, and Higgins has him by about 2 inches. So that's quite impressive. So when you're looking at a Denzel Mims, you're seeing what he can do at face value. You're getting a guy that is going to be a good size wide receiver, is fast. He's got good length to him in his arms. This definitely seems like a very good option for the Colts at 34, taking Denzel Mims. So I'm all in. What are you thinking about it, Cody?
Yeah, he is my favorite guy there at 34 for the Colts, unless randomly one of those quarterbacks fall. I mean, out of all the wide receivers that I think are most likely going to be available, I know in my mock I said Justin Jefferson, but honestly, he's probably not going to be available. That was just my dream scenario. But if, Denzel Mims, some people are even saying he's a first-round pick. He may not last. It's kind of crazy that some people are saying day 3 guy. Some people are saying first-round pick. So I'm going to say second-round pick. I love him a lot, and he's 6'3", like you mentioned. So he's like only an inch shorter than T. Higgins, but I feel like he's a type of guy that also does some things a little bit better than T. Higgins. I mean, I feel like he's a guy that he's got super impressive catch radius. He's a great at, you look at just some of the stuff that, like you mentioned, T. Higgins, Clemson. I mean, he wasn't playing with a quarterback even close to the level of Lawrence, but he's a guy that on inaccurate throws he does a great way to kind of help alleviate that, if you will. He's a guy that is really good at contested catches, which we know and we've talked about. Even with your guy who we won't talk about, Tyler Johnson, Denzel Mims was really good at that as well, at the contested catches. And we know, similar with T. Higgins, how Phillip Rivers loves to give his guys chances, and that's really a strength here of Mims. He's a guy that is not as great as Jalen Reagor in terms of rack and receiving after the catch type of thing. But he's not bad. He's good and he's strong. And I think he's just a guy that's really good as well with the vertical passing offense that the Colts will presumably run with Rivers. So I like him a lot, and he's also faster than he's going to be a faster guy than T. Higgins, which I like a lot, especially for if you're giving up an inch, but you're that much faster. I like him a lot. I think he's a guy also that fits the check mark of what the Colts are looking for in terms of toughness. He's a guy that's very tough. And, one thing that I think is a little bit underrated, but something that the Colts really value is his blocking ability, run blocking ability. And I think he's really solid at that as well. So if he's there at 34, I would hope that the Colts would highly, highly consider taking Denzel Mims. I'm really a big fan of his game after I've just kind of been reading up about him and watching some of his highlights. I like Denzel Mims quite a lot. And then the next guy, one of my guys, being a Notre Dame fan, some people have projected him as actually a tight end, but he's Chase Claypool out of Notre Dame, 6'4", 238. So he's very big for a receiver. He's by far the biggest receiver we've looked at so far. Arm length 33 and 1.13 inches, hand size 10. So he's got pretty big hands. 40 time, a little bit slower than Mims, 4.42, but not slow. Projected potentially first to second round pick. 2019, he had a pretty good year, 66 catches, 1,037 yards, 13 touchdowns. Mentioned, yards after the catch. He did a really good job there. A big receiver as well. He's tough. He's dangerous when he gets the ball in his hands. He's a guy that I thought during the Senior Bowl had a really good week. He's a guy that, he does, one knock maybe on him is he doesn't play at the speed, but his 40 certainly kind of helped him with that speed. But in 2018, he also, he had 50 catches, 639 yards. So he's been consistent 50 plus catches with Notre Dame. He's a guy that has kind of been bogged down a little bit, especially with Brandon Wimbush as his quarterback for a while. But with getting Ian Book as the quarterback, it's helped him tremendously. And so he's the guy that consistently year after year has gotten better in terms of his stats. And I feel like he's just the type of player that I would really like. And it would be interesting to see. Some people have, like, people who cover the draft for a living have honestly had and talked about, would it make sense to move him to tight end? And we know the Colts need a tight end there. Would be an interesting thought when I hear people say that. But Derek, what are your thoughts here on Chase Claypool?
My first thoughts when I saw Chase Claypool was like, are you kidding me? 6'4", 240 pounds, and can run a 4.4. I mean, that's incredible. A guy that size should not be able to run like that. Yeah. It's insane just how amazing it was. I mean, when people saw him at the combine, you're right. That 40 time, that put him on notice. Because it's just like, wow, a guy that's that size can run that fast makes you think, like, what the heck is everyone else doing that weighs 205? Why are they not running this 40 time? I mean, Chase Claypool, is a phenomenal freak when it comes to athleticism. You mentioned the stats. I mean, it is absolutely impressive this last year. A guy that, can definitely make the big play. I think they said, consistency wise for him is a little bit of an issue last season, with some of the drops and everything. But every receiver kind of has that at time to time. And I mean, when we talk about, when you're not playing at that speed, I mean, that kind of makes it, that stinks to hear that, because it's like, it makes you think he's got that potential in him. Why hasn't that been unlocked? It's like, if you're not playing to that speed, then we need to see that. We need to see you play to that speed. So hopefully whoever gets him can get that instinct in him to play faster. And hopefully that just makes it go even further. Because, I mean, the intangibles of this kid is incredible. And then you mix in the 40 time with the rest of his combine numbers that he had. I mean, Chase Claypool is a second round wide receiver, no question in my book. No question about it. All right, now we're going to move on to another wide receiver here, Brandon Aiyuk from Arizona State. He comes in at 5'11", 200 pounds, 33-inch arms. I think they said, yeah, that's the same arm length as Chase Claypool, which is very interesting. 10-inch hands. So again, arms and hands are definitely abnormal for his size. And then runs a 4.5 flat. Aiyuk is actually, some have questioned him being in the first round potentially, but most conclude he's going to be a second rounder. Had a really good senior year last year for Arizona State, had 65 catches for nearly 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns. He was mainly the big play guy, and obviously he saw a huge jump in production from his junior year to his senior year, where he had 20 more catches in his senior year and nearly tripled his yards, which is quite crazy, and then nearly tripled his touchdowns. So even Todd McShay had Aiyuk as a first round pick in multiple mock drafts that he's done. So it goes to show you what the national media thinks about Brandon Aiyuk. But then again, we can't necessarily think too much about the national media, because did you see earlier today, Cody, that one CBS Sports article that didn't even mention Kenny Moore when talking about the secondary?
So silly. And it's funny because they act like the Colts have no slot guys, and they literally have Kenny Moore, the best slot corner in the league, arguably, and they signed PJ Carey. So they have
arguably,
literally two solid guys.
He is.
Yeah.
He is the best. You have the best slot corner in football on your team, and yet they don't even mention his name. I mean, and Kenny Moore saw it. He obviously saw it, and he said, I'm not going to pay it any attention. I'm quite positive that whoever made that article is definitely going to have a nice little word with their boss tomorrow morning for sure. Anyway, let's go back to Aiyuk here. So yeah, obviously we talked about it. Could be a late first rounder, early second. He obviously couldn't participate in the Senior Bowl, and because of an injury that he had, he's actually was a lot shorter than what most projected him at. He was actually shorter when they measured him, but nonetheless had a good combine performance. Obviously the intangibles speak for himself. Yes, he's only 5'11" and 200 pounds, but again, the arms and the hands are really long for somebody his size. 40 time is pretty decent. And the way he plays, he's definitely a big playmaker. I would love to see Aiyuk in there. That would be absolutely phenomenal to me. But yeah, go ahead, Cody, with what do you think about Aiyuk?
Yeah, I like him a lot, simply because he's a guy that's going to stretch that defense. He also has some potential at returner, which we know Nyheim Hines obviously played really well at the end of the year, but even potentially kick returner. I know Zach Pascal was kind of handling that role, but just getting some more options back there for you. I like that. He's a guy that is very hard to tackle sometimes. He's a guy that I think he's, like you mentioned, he's about 5'11", 6 foot. So he's not the tallest receiver in the world, but I feel like he makes up for it just with how elusive he is and how good he is after the catch. And he's a guy that, maybe some of the things that would be some question marks would be kind of contested catches and stuff like that. But, I think he did really well out of Arizona State. I think he's a guy that, in the second round could be potentially a fit for the Colts a lot. But, it's a guy that I'm like, I don't know if I want him at 34 either. It's kind of similar to T. Higgins in the way where I'm like, if you can get him at 44, I would take that. But, 34, I'm not 100% sold on. But yeah, I like Aiyuk. That being said, I like him a lot. I think he's a guy that could fit well into this Colts offense. Just get them more playmakers for Phillip Rivers. So I like Brandon Aiyuk quite a bit. All right, so moving on here. KJ Hamler, I know the guy that you mocked to the Colts, Derek. He's the smaller guy here. He's only 5'9", 178, arm length 30.75, hands 9.38. The projected 40 time 4.40. He's probably going to be a guy that's a little bit later in the draft. Maybe, I know he's projected anywhere from second round to fourth round. he's a guy that's a big play, similar to Aiyuk. He's just smaller. Kind of gives me T.Y. Hilton vibes in that way, where he's fast. He's not overly tall. He's not going to out jump anybody. But, you know, in 2019, he had a pretty good year. He caught 56 passes, 904 yards, and 8 touchdowns. And in 2018, he had 42 catches, 754 yards, and 5 touchdowns. He also had a rushing touchdown as well. He's just a guy that projects potentially as a deep threat receiver to kind of stretch those defenses. He kind of reminds me, like I said, T.Y. Hilton, maybe some Deshaun Jackson in him a little bit. But yeah, I like him. I like him a lot, and especially you got to consider T.Y. Hilton's, you know, he's up there in age now. He's 30, so potentially looking at getting kind of a clone of T.Y. Hilton, if you will, especially if you can get him maybe in the 3rd or 4th round. I certainly like KJ Hamler a lot. Derek, what are your thoughts here on Hamler?
I'm gonna say something that my high school football coach would always say to the wide receiver group, and I feel like this can really seem fitting for KJ Hamler's sake. Here we go. Use your damn hands, son. Yeah, so that's what I want to say about that. Hamler has a very unique way of catching the football. I think he's actually one of those guys that, you know, for as talented as he is, just uses his body more time and his chest more times than not to catch a ball, especially when he's contested. He just likes to use that body, and sometimes it works. Most of the time, it doesn't. He actually, I've seen a couple of highlight clips of people putting out that KJ Hamler's taking a few footballs to the face mask on catches going up for it. Which kind of stinks because, you know, even at 5'9", he definitely can jump. I've seen him get up for balls and everything. But what you know is what you're going to get with KJ when he comes into your system is a guy that's still going to learn to have to use his hands more efficiently in every aspect. But again, that's something that I think you can work on. It's just something that, you know, he's going to have to just every day just catch 200 balls just with his hands, not using his body, just using his hands. And that's ultimately what he's going to have to do. But when you look at what Hamler can be, obviously speed demon, a 4.4 40 time. He's just a big play guy. He can burn anyone. He's got great agility. And his knack for finding the football is definitely really good. He's had a couple decent games against Ohio State, not going to lie. And I would know because, you know, Penn State always tries to make it out that they're Ohio State's rival, but you know, I would argue against them, but then again, they're more of a threat to us than Michigan. But you know, that's not a discussion we're gonna make. But anyway, KJ Hamler, yeah, he's a raw talent that still needs help with the fundamentals of catching, which kind of just sounds weird for a guy that's a 2nd or 4th round pick. But again, you get somebody that's very athletic, very good instincts. I like what I see with KJ. Just again, probably not somebody that the Colts should look heavily at, especially if you got some other guys here. And here's one that a lot of people are saying anywhere from 2nd to 3rd, and especially as of recently, and that is Michael Pittman Jr., the wide receiver from USC, at 6'3", 215 pounds, arms at 32.5, and then 9.13 hands. So his hands are actually smaller than most guys, which is kind of weird to think about for somebody that height. 40 time is a 4.52. Pittman just was phenomenal last year for USC. Had 101 catches for 1,275 yards and 11 touchdowns. I mean, they say that he's majorly a 3rd round pick projection just because of that speed, but I don't necessarily think that makes him go low into the 3rd round. I honestly don't think so. Had a slow start to the Senior Bowl week because, you know, he had an injury early. But at the combine, had a solid 40, especially for a guy that's, you know, 6'3". That's incredible. You know, it's one of those things. He's had a lot of different head coaches, had a lot of different quarterbacks throwing the ball to him. But one thing you saw from this last year. I mean, 101 catches. That is incredible. That is a lot of receptions. I mean, this dude was almost getting 10 catches a game. I mean, that's incredible to think about that. It's he's a guy that can definitely go up and get it. He's got decent arms. At 6'3", 220, that's phenomenal. And somebody that can go up and get the ball, that's what would go great in this system for the Colts. I'm all aboard Michael Pittman at some point, second or even third round, if you think you can get him there. Cody, what do you think?
Yeah, he's a guy that I like a lot. I feel like I don't want to keep like rehashing, but he's a good red zone threat. He's a guy that is like you said, he's 6'4", 219, bigger receiver. He's a guy that has good hands, which I think is great. He has to if he caught 101 balls last year. He's a guy that I think will be, just could be a good weapon for Phillip Rivers, and maybe a guy you don't have to spend a second round pick on. Maybe you could get him in the third round. But he's a guy that he's going to have to develop and figure out how to win off of press coverage a little bit more. And he's good. I think one thing that he's really good at is he's a good route runner, and I think that'll be huge for the Colts. And I know that was kind of maybe a knock on Paris Campbell last year coming out of Ohio State, but that won't be a concern here with Pittman. He's a guy that senior, so he kind of fits the mold into what Chris Ballard's looking for. He's a guy that has been very productive at a high level, and I'm personally good with drafting him there in the third round. So I like him quite a lot, simply because of the size and the production there. The next guy on our list, a guy that we were actually talking about off air a little bit, I believe, and that's Laviska Shenault. He's a guy that I believe he was projected to potentially be a top 10 pick early on, and then he just kind of dropped. There's been question marks, kind of, is he even a first rounder now? But 2019, he had 52 catches for 721 yards, 4 touchdowns. And it was, I think, a reason why he kind of fell was because it was a frustrating year for Shenault in a lot of ways. He obviously dealt with some inconsistent quarterback play, which I think factored into that. Had some injuries there. So there's just some reasons behind that. But, he's a guy that, he's a guy that had to deal with that at Colorado, just some different factors there. But, in those limited opportunities, I think this is something where you see Shenault, he made some big and impactful plays in those limited opportunities. But one thing that people will have to consider here for sure is the medical report. I mean, it's going to be huge for his draft stock because he had a core muscle surgery after the combine, which is obviously something that teams are going to have to continue to monitor and see, is he worth taking that risk on? And also, another thing, some teams after the combine said some interviews with Shenault weren't the greatest. And as a result, even though he's superbly talented, all those factors could contribute into him potentially sliding out of the first round. And that means he could potentially be there for the Colts 34, 44. Who knows how far he could slide, but potentially could be a day 2 guy there. What are your thoughts here, Derek, beyond what I've said about Shenault?
Yeah, when you just kind of look at, the intangibles, being 6'1", nearly 230 pounds of muscle, about 32-inch arms, 9-inch hands. And obviously the 40 time isn't that great, but I think most people said he actually plays faster than what the numbers say. So, I mean, it's one of those guys that, just looks beyond what the numbers are. And obviously when you're playing at Colorado, the Colorado quarterback situation hadn't been great the last few years. So yeah, it does make sense that, his numbers were deflated at times, but I like what I see in Laviska for, athletic wise, whether or not, what people said when it comes to his interviews and stuff, whether he had one of those interviews with the Colts that were bad, who knows? For all we know, it just could have been another team that had issues. But if he turns out to be a guy that I think that, the Colts want to take that chance on, then you could. But I don't necessarily think I would go for Laviska if we're seeing all these issues being brought to light. That's just me, though. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a wide receiver that a lot of people haven't really mentioned, for a couple different reasons, and we'll kind of talk about that here and now. So we have here Colin Johnson, wide receiver from Texas. And I looked at this guy because when you look at intangibles sake, I mean, the intangibles are absolutely there. And it won't get into why he's such a low slipper here. The 6'5", 220 pounds, 33-inch arms, 9-inch hands, ran a 4.55. I mean, he's projected to be a third, fourth round pick. Johnson had 38 receptions for 560 yards, 3 touchdowns in 2019. He missed a lot of the season due to a hamstring injury. He's basically, what you're going to get him as is a long linear receiver who has some athleticism. He actually does have a really good attribute of being able to sink his hips. And that's not necessarily something that you see a lot from a guy that's 6'5". I mean, Calvin Johnson was a 6'5", 6'6" guy, but I mean, Calvin Johnson wasn't able to dip his hips like that. I don't necessarily think. I mean, but the weird thing is though, being 6'5", he actually wasn't that great at playing jump balls, which is really odd for somebody that's, easily taller than any cornerback that he's ever going to face. And his movements are really good. But he still has some issues with tracking the ball. And he struggles again to get off of press coverage. So what you're basically getting on this guy is somebody who is a finesse player. You're getting somebody who, again, just needs work on just about everything in mechanics for the wide receiver game, but he has the intangibles to do something. I mean, it's kind of like what we said about, we talked about James Morgan in the quarterback session. James Morgan, numbers and oftentimes the play doesn't always reflect what he can be. You just kind of look at their intangibles, what they're gifted with physically, and what can you make into that. I mean, basically, Colin Johnson's same thing. He's prospect. Obviously not worth the time, in my opinion, for the Colts to do if you're having to put that much time and effort into a guy like Colin Johnson, especially for a guy like Phillip Rivers who likes to let it rip and let receivers go get it. If you have difficulty searching for the ball, then might not be very great to may not be very much help for Phillip Rivers in that offense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another thing that I was looking at his hand size, that could be an issue as well. It's only 8.75. And so you kind of even can see it on film a little bit. Sometimes he'll let some of those, catches slip through his fingers. And as a big body receiver, it's just like, that's just one of his limitations there. He's not going to be a guy that gives you a lot of yards after the catch. I mean, he's just a bigger guy. He's 6'5", probably about 6'6", 6'5". So he's a big receiver, but as a result, you sacrifice kind of some of that receiving yards after the catch. And for a guy that size, I feel like you want more probably from the vertical receiving game. He doesn't offer you a ton about that. And he's not like slow, but he's not, going to break the top off of a defense. But certainly the size is appealing. Like you mentioned, 6'6", 220, a big guy there. Like if you get him a little bit later, I would be fine with it. But yeah, probably sitting there second round, maybe even third round. I don't know. But he certainly got the size to be a good red zone threat for the Colts. And so he's definitely a guy that's interesting on my radar. And so, yeah, that's kind of my take there on Colin Johnson. And now I'll move over here to another wide receiver, Van Jefferson. Van Jefferson. He's a guy, I really like his name, Van Jefferson. That's a cool name. Wide receiver out of Florida. He's 6'1", 200 pounds. He's got arms 32.75, hands 9.13. 40 time wasn't terrific, 4.55. Probably going to be more of a third mid-round pick, third to fifth round there. With Florida, he had 49 catches, 657 yards, 6 touchdowns. But I think the thing that maybe boosted him a little bit was he had a good Senior Bowl week of practice. Really helped himself a lot. He kind of showed some polished route running and some good hands and kind of a more gritty, I guess you could say, style of play. I think he's going to be a guy that's probably going to be a backup caliber type of receiver. But he also brings us a value on special teams, which is a big deal. A good gunner probably on some punts and stuff, but an injury kept him from working out the combine, so that could be another factor as well. And so 2018 he had 35 catches, 503 yards, 6 touchdowns. He has decent size and quickness and hands and route running. What are your thoughts here, Derek, on Van Jefferson?
When you look at his intangibles, pretty decent at everything, 6'1", 200 pounds, almost 33-inch arms, 9-inch hands, a 4.55 40 time. Not amazing, but it's not terrible by any stretch. But yeah, you saw when you looked in the Senior Bowl, right? You saw those one-on-ones that he had. I mean, Van Jefferson was one of the few names that kept getting brought up every 5 minutes at the Senior Bowl because, outside of KJ Hill and I think a few others, Van Jefferson just looked like a man on a mission playing in the one-on-ones. Was just able to create space so well. Very agile, very good footwork, very good route runner. So that route running ability certainly makes up for that speed. So Van Jefferson, again, yeah, if you can get him 3rd, 4th round, I wouldn't mind a shot at Van Jefferson because, it's definitely worth the shot. But yeah, like you said, that injury, some say that you never know how bad that one is. So we'll have to just see whether or not the Colts again think it's worth the risk on that. All right, let's move on to a guy that some people talked about after the combine, not necessarily for his season performance, but just by his numbers. Donovan Peoples-Jones. So we have a 6'2", 210-pound wide receiver, 33.5-inch arms, over 10-inch hands, had a 4.48 40 time. He was actually one of the more higher top recruit wide receivers coming out of high school. But he just never really turned into that star that people thought that he was going to be. I remember going into the 2017 or 2018 season, Michigan fans and even the national media were saying, Donovan Peoples-Jones, look out. This could be the next guy. But, he had 34 receptions for 438 yards and 6 touchdowns. But obviously, with Shea Patterson and the quarterbacks that they've had at the helm, doesn't surprise me that some of his numbers kind of stunk. Here's the thing. Donovan Peoples-Jones has a very bad drop problem. I think in the Ohio State game last season had 3 or 4 drops in that game. He had just as many drops as he had catches. So you can't afford to have that happen. I don't care how good your intangibles are. I don't care how fast or how athletic you are. If you're not able to catch the ball consistently, you're not going to be able to fit on an NFL roster unless you develop that. His combine performance is why people are giving him such a decent rating because of just everything that you see from him athletically and physically. But I just don't trust his game. And this is not an Ohio State homer coming out of me. I don't necessarily like that Donovan Peoples-Jones has a drop problem. We already have that issue in Indianapolis. Okay. We don't need it anymore. So Donovan Peoples-Jones is a no for me. What do you think, Cody?
Yeah, it depends really where you get him. Some people are high on him, but if he's going as high as some people are saying, yeah, I probably would pass on him. But, he's a guy that I think, unfortunately, we know the drop problem, but he also played with pretty erratic quarterback play, which I think is a factor that we have to consider. A guy that, I think, what if he gets coached up a little bit, he could maybe turn into a pretty good receiver for you. But you mentioned the wide receiver or the wide receivers with the Colts have experienced a lot of drop problems recently. And so do you want to get another guy like that who struggles with that? But it's not like he has bad hands. I think it maybe is just there's just other factors there where he does, maybe needs to figure out how to secure the catch. Like you said, use his hands a little bit more instead of those body type of catches. But yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of just like, I feel like he's got the size and the some of the attributes that you're looking for in a good NFL receiver, but there's also some factors, and there's a reason why he's probably not going to go as high as some people were proclaiming a few years ago, And so I don't know. I'm kind of torn on him. I'm probably going to lean more towards no, because I think he's probably going to go before I would prefer to take him at. So probably a no there for me as well. Next guy here for us is another wide receiver, KJ Hill. He's 6 foot, 196, out of Ohio State. So you know him, Derek, pretty well. He's got 29-inch arms, so a little bit shorter arms, 9-inch hands, 40 time, 4.60. Probably 4th to 6th round, we're guessing here. So late pick, mid to late pick. He had 57 catches last year for Ohio State, 636 yards, 10 touchdowns. He was very clutch last year for Ohio State in a lot of ways. He showed some good hands, some good route running, some good yards after the catch ability, and also some quickness. He's a very polished receiver who I think could play both the slot inside or outside for an NFL team. I think at the Senior Bowl, he had a pretty solid week of practice overall, but at the combine, he didn't have great numbers. But, you go back to the game against Oregon State, right, in 2018. And, he came out with that huge touchdown. And he also, he just made some plays throughout that year. He had 70 catches, 885 yards, 6 touchdowns. He was solid and dependable. And, he's just a guy that I feel like could potentially project to be one of those, low risk, high reward type of players. Just a solid receiver that could give you some much needed just safety net for your quarterback. And that's just something the Colts have not had. What are your thoughts here, Derek? You probably know a lot more about KJ Hill than I do. What are your thoughts on him?
Absolutely. I know a lot about this guy. I know Colts fans. I know. I hear you in your heads about ready to type, not another Ohio State player. I get that. But here's the issue that I have. KJ Hill has played in some very unfortunate circumstances because of the situations of he shifted from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day, right? He's played alongside some very good wide receiver combos at Ohio State over the last 2 years. He played in 2018 alongside Paris Campbell, Terry McLaurin, and Johnny Dixon, one of the best combos in Ohio State history in terms of statistics that we've seen from wide receiver groups. And then last season played alongside Chris Olave, who might end up being the number 1 wide receiver in the draft next year. Garrett Wilson, who is the number 1 wide receiver coming out of high school last year, had a very good freshman campaign, was playing alongside Austin Mack and Benjamin Victor. And even despite all of this, despite so many great wide receivers playing from Ohio State, KJ Hill has the most receptions in a career in Ohio State history. Let that sink in for a second. For a guy that's 6 foot tall, not even 200 pounds, it has shorter arms and small hands, doesn't have a tremendous 40 time, and is not amazingly gifted athletically, has the most receptions in Ohio State history. Think of how many great wide receivers have come out of Ohio State in past years. You had Chris Carter. You had Anthony Gonzalez. You had Ted Ginn Jr. You had Santonio Holmes. You had other guys recently, but no one has done what KJ Hill does. He doesn't play like what the numbers tell you. Do not let the numbers fool you. Do not let the 40 time and his jumping and all this stuff fool you. He has never had an issue with catching the ball. He has a very good route running. Like it's Cody said, he has great after the catch ability, even though he does not have great speed. He's quick. He's got great agility. I know the speed and everything else doesn't pop off to you, but when you look at the way this kid plays, he is just an all-around wide receiver. You can put him anywhere. You can put him in anything and he'll catch the ball for you. That's just the player that he is. Just go back and watch film, folks. There's a lot of it out there, and there's a lot of great plays from KJ Hill. If KJ Hill falls to the 4th or 5th round and the Colts are fortunate enough to go for him, he will make you regret ever saying that an Ohio State player is not worth drafting if you're the Indianapolis Colts. Just telling you all that right now.
Boom.
All right. Last wide receiver here that we have listed and who we're going to talk about today. Another wide receiver in the Big Ten, and as Quintez Cephus, 6'1", 202 pounds, 32-inch arms, 9-inch hands, a 40 time of 4.73. Again, not necessarily the greatest of 40 times, but Quintez in a offensive system that was not necessarily built for a passing option. And we obviously know Wisconsin loves to run the football. Obviously, the stats aren't necessarily amazing, but had 59 receptions for 901 yards and 7 touchdowns. And obviously had a broken leg in 2017, which stinks. Actually, there is a story to tell when you're talking about Cephas's past, and this is one where it can turn some people off, and understandably so. Cephas was taken out of the Wisconsin football program because he was being charged with sexual assault from sometime in 2018. He was acquitted at trial before being reinstated back into the football team. So, that's, again, another thing that, people might turn you off by that. Some people had issues with the Bobby Okereke thing, but only thing is the police, again, could not get any evidence to prove Okereke did it. So, and Okereke was straight up about it with the Colts. So that's why, again, they liked that he was straightforward with them. Who knows how that's going to influence Quintez Cephus. But one thing that I can say, there was one guy in this draft that said Quintez was the hardest receiver that he had to guard all season long. Do you know what corner that was in this draft, Cody? Do you remember who that was?
I don't remember, but I'm going to guess. Is it Okudah? Jeffrey Okudah?
Yes, it was Okudah. Okudah went on TV and on live TV and said Cephus was the hardest wide receiver I had to guard all year. I mean, and that's a nice compliment coming from the easy number 1 corner in the draft this year. So if that gives you any kind of indication, another guy that, you just kind of don't look at the numbers, just think of what he could bring to your team in terms of route running. Because he did definitely get the better of Okudah a few times this last year. So what do you think, Cody?
Yeah, he's a good guy, good route runner, similar to KJ Hill. He's a guy that I think has tremendous footwork, which is huge. He's a guy that has good hands. I like his hands a lot. I think he's a guy that can pluck the ball out of the air pretty well. He's a guy, like you mentioned, he was in the Wisconsin system, which is a really run-first system. And so he didn't probably if you put him in another system where there's more of a focus, if you will, on the passing offense, he'd probably have a lot better numbers. But, he still had decent numbers. He's a guy, I feel like he's a very polished guy. He's a good guy in terms of vertical game, which works well with Frank Reich. He's better, I would say, on the deep routes in terms of longer speed as opposed to, short in cut, those type of speeds. he's a guy that, like I said, like maybe he's a guy that you can get a little bit later for a good value pick. And stats are good, but stats are often misleading. And I feel like that could be the case here with him. He's a guy that he's a tough guy, good receiver. He's good, like I said, good at route running, which I think is big. But like you said, one of the red flags is that 2018 season where he faced those sexual assault allegations. And I think he could be a guy that he can play outside, he can play slot, he can do a lot of good things for you. He's not short, but he's 6'1". He's got decent size for a wide receiver. Yeah, I would like him, especially if you can get him for a value pick there. But yeah, I think that does it, Derek, here for all of our look at the wide receiver group. I hope you guys like this one. I'm looking right now. We're over an hour. So hope you guys just love this content. That's what we're trying to pump out right now. Just good content for you guys to just consume, because we know a lot of you are stuck at home, not able to really do much except just listen to podcasts, read about, your favorite team. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Mm-hmm.
Give you as much Colts content as we can from the time from this Thursday until the next Thursday. That's what we're trying to do.
Yep.
So yeah, for Derek and myself, I think that does it for this podcast. Thank you guys so much for all your support and all your love for our content and our channel. It's been a tremendous journey alongside of you guys to be able to see how this channel has really exploded over these last few weeks. And hopefully that'll happen again here with all this content we're going to pump out. But for Derek and myself, thank you guys so much. And as always, go Colts.